When you hear the word apartheid, what do you think of? Probably the disturbing images of racial segregation between whites and blacks in South Africa, where a regime ruled by a racist white minority declared themselves officially superior to the black majority, then proceeded to dominate them. South Africa's apartheid system officially ended in the mid-1990s, but that doesn't mean apartheid can't happen elsewhere. Here, in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, Palestinians are being forced off their land and out of their homes, separated and segregated by laws, walls, and checkpoints. They live in a constant state of fear and insecurity, and deliberately impoverished. While, on the other hand, Israeli authorities have given the Jewish Israeli population privilege over Palestinians in just about every facet of life. The question is, does this all amount to the crime of apartheid? First, the definition of apartheid. The crime against humanity of apartheid is perpetrated when particular serious human rights violations are committed with the purpose of establishing and maintaining a system of domination by one racial group over another and systematically oppressing them. But does this system exist in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories?
And there's been a growing debate about whether the situation in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories is apartheid. And now is the time for us, as the world's largest human rights organization, to offer up our analysis. Our findings and criticism are directed not at the Jewish people, but at the Israeli state. It's the Israeli state that put in place the policies that implement the laws and the practices that oppress Palestinians.
Well, Israeli leaders have been clear about their intentions from the beginning. In 1948, just before he became the first Prime Minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion visited Lifta and other Palestinian areas near Jerusalem that were completely emptied of Palestinian residents following attacks by Jewish forces. He stated, "There are no Arabs, 100% Jews. If we persist, it is quite possible that in the next 6 or 8 months there will be considerable changes in the country, very considerable, and to our advantage." More than 70 years later, then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posted on Instagram that Israel is not a state of all its citizens, but rather the nation-state of the Jewish people and only them. So, it's no surprise that Israel built a system of racially discriminatory laws, policies, and practices that privilege only Jewish people. And Palestinians, well, Palestinians live there too. They were there before Israel was established. But, as we will explain, they've been trapped for decades in a system that treats them as a lesser, non-Jewish racial group. Before Israel was established in 1948, Palestinians comprised most of the population, around 70%, and owned the vast majority of private land, about 90%, in what was British Mandate Palestine. Jews, many of whom had emigrated from Europe, comprised around 30% of the population, and they and Jewish institutions owned about 6.5% of the land.
The port of Haifa in Palestine lies shattered by bombs and strewn with dead.
In the course of establishing Israel as a Jewish state in 1948, Israeli authorities acted to turn the situation on its head and were responsible for the mass expulsion of Palestinians and the destruction of hundreds of villages, forcing around 800,000 Palestinians out of their homes and lands. Thousands of Palestinians and Jews were killed in the context of attacks on civilians during this conflict. Today there are around 6 million Palestinian refugees who Israel denies the right to return to their homes. After the 1967 war, Israel occupied the Palestinian territories of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. Israel's brutal military rule, coupled with the establishment and expansion of illegal Jewish settlements, has coerced Palestinians into enclaves, creating further fragmentation and segregation. The objective? Maintain Jewish Israeli hegemony and maximize control of land. In the city of Jerusalem, the Israeli official policy is to maintain at least a 60% Jewish majority.
If you've always felt a deep yearning for Jerusalem, now is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity not only to stand within its gates, but also to build the home of your dreams there.
So where do all the Palestinians live now? 3.4 million live outside of Israel in the occupied territories, mainly in refugee camps in neighbouring countries. 2.5 million Palestinians live in Israel, in East Jerusalem, restricted to enclaves that make up around 3% of the entire area. 3 million Palestinians live in the occupied West Bank, but are only allowed to access 40% of the land to live and work. The rest of the area is for the Jewish Israeli settlers only. 2 million are trapped in the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Fragmentation of the Palestinian society and the dispossession of their lands are key pillars of Israel's apartheid system to maintain domination and control. But there's more. The unequal structure of nationality and status, restrictions on freedom of movement, use of military rule, denial of right to political participation or the right to peaceful protest, and cruel separation of families all add to the complex system that we see today.
The world in general hasn't woken up to the fact that there is an entrenched system of oppression against Palestinians across Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, wherever they may live, by the Israeli state. It's a system that's been put in place and maintained for decades, and it's that system that is the root cause of so many of the violations, the misery and the suffering that millions of Palestinians face on a daily basis.
One way to understand this segregation and oppression is to look at the ID system. Jewish Israelis have only one ID card, with a status that grants them the rights to live almost anywhere they wish in the country. They can move freely with access to healthcare and vast resources. Palestinians, on the other hand, have 4 types of ID cards, if any at all. The kind of ID card you are given determines the level of rights you can enjoy and controls where you can go and what you can do. If you hold a green card, you are subject to military rule. And if you have a green card with a Gaza address, it means you're trapped in a 365 kilometre square open-air prison under Israeli military blockade in place since 2007. Israel controls what goes in and what goes out, from children's toys to medical supplies. 90% of the people have no access to safe drinking water, 47% are unemployed, 56% live in poverty. Palestinians with a Gaza ID are forbidden from going to Jerusalem in the West Bank, even if they have family there. Some people in the West Bank are considered to live there illegally and can be deported immediately to Gaza if found by the army, even if they have been in the West Bank for decades. Whereas, if you hold a green card which has a West Bank address, then you live here. This green card means you can live within specific enclaves surrounded by illegal Israeli settlements. And there's a separation wall and fences built around you since 2002, which Palestinians call the Apartheid Wall. It's 8 meters high in places and 700 kilometers long. That's twice the height of the Berlin Wall and more than 4 times its length. 80% of it is built inside the West Bank, occupying even more Palestinian land. There are separate roads for Israelis and Palestinians, hundreds of checkpoints scattered throughout, not to mention the 54 years of occupation which has devastated the lives of millions of Palestinians. Palestinians with a West Bank ID can travel to Gaza or East Jerusalem, but only if they receive a permit from the military to do so. This blue ID is for Palestinians in East Jerusalem. They can travel to the occupied West Bank as well as to Israel, but they are not citizens of Israel. They have only been granted a residency status. This means that they cannot vote in Israeli national elections, and if they leave East Jerusalem for too long, for example to study or work abroad or in other parts of the occupied West Bank, their residency is revoked, so they can't return. Since 1967, Israel has revoked the residency status of more than 14,600 Palestinians from East Jerusalem. Finally, Palestinian citizens of Israel. They have been through it all. They are the group that remained in Israel despite the ethnic cleansing in 1948. They lived under Israeli military rule that applied only to them and not Jewish Israelis for 18 years between 1948 and 1966. They were made citizens but can never become nationals and enjoy equality unless they become Jewish, which the law prohibits. They are the only Palestinians who can run and vote in Israeli elections, and they can move relatively freely but the inequality against them was never dismantled, and they face daily institutional discrimination, including as members of parliament. And if this complex ID system wasn't enough to segregate the Palestinian community, in 2002 Israel introduced a law that prohibits family unification. That's right, denying Palestinians the right to live with their loved ones if their ID cards are different. And this woman is one of thousands of Palestinians who Israel will not issue any ID card. She can't travel, can't hug her family, only see them meters away across the border. Putting down roots, the family home, these are crucial parts of what make a strong community. To make sure Palestinian communities can't develop any further, Israel has made it almost impossible to grant building permits for Palestinian homes. So, Palestinians live in a catch-22 situation. In order to have shelter or develop their communities, they must build without a permit. And if they do so, Israel can demolish the structures on the basis that it was built without a permit. Right now, there are over 150,000 Palestinians currently living under the constant threat of demolition and forced eviction, many of them for the second or third time. In the West Bank, an average of 18 Palestinian structures were demolished every week in 2020. The same year, Israel issued 1,094 building permits for Jewish applicants, and only one for a Palestinian. This goes back to the heart of the issue. To maintain the state's character as Jewish, Israel systematically disadvantages Palestinians while privileging Jewish Israelis. This racist privilege has been enshrined in laws, policies and practices, and it enables Palestinian resources to be taken in order to economically benefit Jewish Israeli citizens.
The system of apartheid is the Israeli state's oppression and domination of Palestinians on a daily basis. It's the laws, the policies and the practices that it puts in place and then implements to control Palestinians' daily lives. And then there are the crimes of apartheid. The crimes of apartheid are those acts, those violations, those patterns of violations that Israel is committing to create and then maintain that system of apartheid.
Amnesty International and other rights organisations have been documenting patterns of human rights violations and international crimes for decades. These are the most visible and violent part of this system. At the end of May 2020, 4,236 Palestinians were held in Israeli prisons, and 352, including 2 children, were held without charge or trial. Between September 2000 and February 2017, Israeli forces killed 4,868 Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories, including 1,793 children, outside the context of armed conflict. And Amnesty International is not aware of any case in which an Israeli soldier has been convicted of willfully causing the death of a Palestinian in the occupied territories since 1987. This imbalance of rights, justice and accountability is never more clear than when a Jewish Israeli life appears to have more value than a Palestinian's. Israel's apartheid and its cruel and prolonged strategies deliberately disadvantage Palestinians wherever they live. They cannot claim and enjoy equality with Jewish Israelis.
Look, everyone can make a difference. Together, we need to speak out on behalf of Palestinians. We need to speak about the human rights violations that they are suffering. We need to talk about the apartheid, the system of apartheid to which they are subjected. Because by campaigning together, putting pressure on the Israeli state, we can have this system of apartheid dismantled. Join us, join our campaign. Everyone has the power to make a difference.
Okay, I have one more video to share, which is about 10 minutes from a trauma expert who I follow.
The first of the conversations that took place on my podcast, Under the Skin, is with Dr. Gabor Mate, the therapist and writer physician, and I would say sort of modern day shaman. But furthermore, and significantly with regards to this matter, he's a Holocaust survivor. Many of his family members were killed in the Holocaust. He had this to say about the situation in Israel now.
This is one of the issues that's closest to my heart, and it has been for a long time. So, you know my history, I don't have to repeat it, but I'm personally a Holocaust survivor as an infant. I barely survived. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz, and most of my extended family was killed. That's my personal background. I grew up ashamed of my Jewishness. In Hungary, after the war, I was still bullied for being Jewish. And I remember one of my friends coming to my rescue once saying, "Leave him alone, it's not his fault that he's Jewish." It's a fault, but it's not his fault. This was the defense. So I grew up with that. In my teenage years in Canada, I became a Zionist. This dream of the Jewish people resurrected in their historical homeland, and the barbed wire of Auschwitz being replaced by the boundaries of a Jewish state with a powerful army. I found it liberating. It was exhilarating to believe in that dream. And I absorbed all that perspective and all that point of view, and I really believed in it. And then I found out that it wasn't exactly like that. That in order to make this Jewish dream a reality, we had to visit a nightmare on the local population. You couldn't, there was a Zionist slogan called a land without a people for a people without a land. But there was no there was no land without a people. There was people living there who'd been living there for hundreds and years or even longer. As a matter of fact, if you want to hear something really interesting, and David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, actually subscribed to this. He said this, who are the Palestinians? Because the Jews in Roman times, all of them never left Palestine. Many of them stayed there. And some of them, hundreds of years later, converted to Islam. So guess what the Palestinians are? In some ways, they might be descendants of ancient Jews. They are cousins, to say the least, no matter how you look at it. And and there's no way you could have ever created a Jewish state without oppressing and expelling the local population, which is what they did in 1947, beginning in 1947, and first of all with British Empire protection, but they did this, and then in 1948, Israeli historians, Jewish Israeli historians, have shown without a doubt that the expulsion of the Palestinians was persistent, it was pervasive, it was cruel, it was murderous, and with deliberate attempt. So that's what's called the Nakba in Arabic, the disaster or the catastrophe. Now in Canada, there's a law that you cannot deny the Holocaust. I don't believe in such laws, by the way. But in Israel, you're not allowed to mention the Nakba, even though it was at the very basis of the foundation of the state. So once I became aware of all this, I was, okay, well, yeah, we created this beautiful dream, but we imposed a nightmare on somebody else. And then I visited the occupied territories, Russell, during the first Intifada. I cried every day for 2 weeks at what I saw. The brutality of the occupation, the petty harassment, the murderousness of it, the burning down of Palestinian, or cutting down of Palestinian olive groves, the denial of water rights, the humiliations. And this went on, and it's much worse now than it was then. So this is the background. And it couldn't have been in any other way. Because again, you couldn't have created that exclusive Jewish state without oppressing or expelling the local population. It's the longest ethnic cleansing operation in the 20th and 21st centuries. It's still going on. And who are these people in Gaza? Now you have to go to Gaza. You have to go there to really appreciate it. It's a small area where there are these multiple hundreds of thousands of people. Who are those people? The direct children or grandchildren of the people that were expressed from Israel, or what is now Israel. Now here's the outrage. And I'd like your Zionist friend in the States to tell me this. I, as a Jew, I could land in Tel Aviv tomorrow and demand citizenship under the law of the right of return. But my Palestinian friend in Vancouver, Hannah Kawas, who was born in Jerusalem, can't even visit. So what sense does it? No. So who is Gaza? This desperate, blockaded. Let me stop again. Am I talking too long about this? I'm sorry. This is so important to me, and I know so much about it that I don't even know where to stop.
No, carry on, Gabor, please.
So then you have these miserable people packed into this horrible, people call it the world's largest outdoor prison, which is what it is. Incredible poverty, 50% unemployment. Now Hamas is an Islamic organization that was originally encouraged by Israel and supported by Israel as a counterweight to the secular Palestine Liberation Organization, which Israel didn't want to deal with. And given those conditions, of course people will go for extremist leadership. That's what people do when they're miserable and hopeless and deprived of any possibility whatsoever. You don't have to support Hamas policies to stand up for Palestinian rights. That's a complete falsity. But there were free elections in Gaza, monitored by international community. They were declared to be the freest elections ever held in the Arab world. And Hamas happened to win. And when Hamas won that election, Israel and the United States immediately organized a military coup against them, which Hamas defeated, for which the punishment was this blockade that deprives Hamas of, not Hamas, but Gaza, of food, of medical supplies, of sufficient water. I could go on and on and on and on. And then you have this conflict. And then every time there's a conflict, Israel mows the lawn. That's the expression they use. You know what they call it? They call it mowing the lawn, by which they mean the mass murder of Palestinian civilians. Now, is it true that the Gazans shoot rockets into Israel, killing innocent civilians? Yes, it is. Do I support that? No, I don't. But when it comes to the death of innocent civilians, Israel killed 20,000 Lebanese civilians in 1982 using illegal weapons like cluster bombs in a war that had no justification whatsoever. I could go on and on and on and on, except I'll say that the disproportion of power and responsibility and oppression is so markedly on one side that if you take the worst thing you can say about Hamas, multiplied by 1,000 times, and it still will not meet the Israeli repression and killing and dispossession of Palestinians. If after 2,000 years we can look for liberation and freedom, why can't the Palestinians? If you look at the Western press, when Hong Kong demonstrators throw stones at the police in Hong Kong, that's considered to be heroism in the American press. When in Myanmar, the demonstrators throw slingshots at the army, at the oppressive army, they're considered to be heroes in the Western press. When Palestinian kids throw stones at the Israeli soldiers, they're called terrorists. And Israel gets away with a lot more without much less criticism in the Western press than any other country. I'll say one more thing. I was recently contacted by a Palestinian woman from Jericho. She runs a program for Palestinian children who spend time in Israeli jails. 14, 15, 16-year-olds are jailed for months or years. Sometimes they can't see their families for months. And she runs a program for them. You know what she does? She meditates with them. She does Sufi dervish dancing with them, swirling dancing, to bring them out of their stress state. She says, we don't have post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. The trauma is daily, she said. I just wish your Zionist friend would visit the occupied territories in Gaza like I have, and let him speak the way he speaks now. If he's got any ounce of humanity left, he would cry like I did for 2 weeks when I was there. Now, we're not living in Nazi Germany. Anybody can go on YouTube and listen to Ilan Pappé, an Israeli historian, totally eloquent on Israeli history, who's living in England now because life became in Israel too difficult for him. Anybody can listen to Norman Finkelstein, a Jewish professor, world expert on Gaza, who was denied tenure at his university because of his public speaking against Israeli policy. You can listen to any number of Israeli Defense Forces soldiers who talk about the brutality that they now regret having committed. You can listen to Israeli pilots who talk about why they refuse to fly over Gaza because of the atrocities they're made to commit. You can get all the information you want. So if anybody these days doesn't know, it's not because the information is not available. It's not what you know, it's what you could know if you wanted to find out. There are no two sides. I mean, it's always a complex question, but in terms of power and control, and it's pretty straightforward. There was a land with the people living there, and other people wanted it. They took it over, and they continue to take it over, and they continue to discriminate against, oppress, and dispossess that other people. That's what happened, and that's what's happening.
Okay, I'm really dark. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm not gonna add any commentary. Just gonna move us into a meditation time. This first one has a visual component to it with the guidance. But yeah, I would invite you to, especially if you're not already, to make yourself really comfortable. You guys can there's enough couches for us all to lay on a couch if you want to lay on a couch. Yeah, we're gonna do this meditation is about grief, and then we'll do another one following it that's a little more about anger and kind of social justice stuff.
So I would like to invite you to put down whatever might be in your hand.
Is that a good volume?
And to find a position that's comfortable and also that supports you. And listen to my words, and if they are resonant for you, if they are helpful, really let them enter into your experience. And also bring your own experience and your own language to what is being pointed to as we touch into this meditation on grief. And beginning with remembering really why you're here. And bring your attention to the breath for just a moment. And let the breath sweep your mind. And notice whether it's a deep breath or shallow. And recall for a moment now a loss or losses that have really touched you, or the anticipation of loss. And I'll offer some simple phrases that we can touch into around the truth of grief. May I be open to the pain of grief. Notice whatever comes up, not rejecting it, not clinging to it. May I be open to the sorrow, to the pain of grief. May I find the inner resources to really be present for my sorrow. May I find the inner resources to really be present for my sorrow. And notice any judgment or resistance that arises. It'll pass. May I accept my sadness, knowing that I am not my sadness. May I accept my sadness, knowing that I am not my sadness. And if you've cared for someone and felt like it wasn't always so easy, reflect on this phrase. May I forgive myself for not meeting my loved one's needs. May I forgive myself for not always being able to meet my loved one's needs. And may I forgive myself for mistakes made and things left undone. So true of all of our life. May I forgive myself for mistakes made and things left undone. May I be open with others and with myself about my experience of loss. May I be open to receive the kindness of others as they support me in this journey of grief. And completing this brief exploration of grief, may I and all beings learn from and transform sorrow. May I and all beings learn from and transform sorrow. Again, noticing whatever is arising for you, whatever thoughts are present, not clinging to them. Whatever you're feeling in your heart, how the body feels. As you consider the possibility that grief can be a profoundly humanizing experience and bring greater depth into our lives.
Welcome to a meditation where we will create space in our Welcome to a meditation where we will create space in our bodies to process and relieve the dis-ease that grief and injustice cause. We are currently living in uncertain and trying times, but these are also times for transformation and conscious shift. Oppression and injustice cause daily trauma, whether we fully realize it or not. Trauma causes us to hold our breath, to breathe shallowly, to tense up. Trauma implants itself in our bodies, which all creates dis-ease, preventing the flow of energy in our physical being. The time is now to name and address the grief that has implanted itself within our beings, so that we can be free because as above, so below. As within, so without. Liberation can begin with what is available, the breath. The breath is something that we can access on our own, as and when we need and wish. Grief and justice are both fire. This fire has the capability to destroy, and it also has the power to fuel and transform. The key is to get the fire to move. Whatever comes up in this meditation, I invite you to allow it to surface, to be revealed so that it has a chance to be healed. To begin this meditation, take a deep breath in and out. If it feels sufficiently safe to do so, you can gently close or lower your eyes. Fill your belly with air, long and slow. And on your exhale, relax the forehead. Taking another deep, slow breath in. And on your exhale, relaxing the jaw. Another long, deep breath in. And on your exhale, relaxing the shoulders away from your ears. Continue breathing down your body as you allow your muscles to soften. Now bringing your attention to your belly, where the rib cages meet. This area of the body houses our personal fire. What fire is present for you here in the belly? Is it a small, dim fire? Is it a larger, raging fire? Is the fire contained? Is the fire wild? Whatever the fire looks like, begin to breathe steadily and evenly into this fire, into the belly. With every breath, notice that the fire begins to take shape and glow bright yellow and red and orange. You have control of this fire. You feel calm. You feel supported. And the fire begins to make you feel warm and tingly. Not too cold, not too hot. As you continue breathing, you notice that this warmth begins to travel through your body, from your core, slowly radiating outward, starting from the pit of your belly, working its way out towards your skin. As the fire, the warmth, travels through your body, it intentionally picks up where the grief had made a home, and slowly moves that grief out to the surface. Take a moment to notice where the fire lingers and takes its time. Notice the areas in your body where the fire quickly takes hold. Notice where this internal fire breezes through. Maybe you've noticed that your breathing has shifted. Perhaps it has deepened or quickened. And I invite you to retain easeful control of the breath, of the fire. This fire creates fuel to keep going, fuel to commit to change. This clearing of grief allows for more movement and freedom. Bring your attention back to your belly. On an inhale, begin to draw your fire up through your chest, through your heart space, noticing if and how grief had made your chest its home. Continuing to pull the fire up through your throat, opening your mouth if that's accessible to you, and letting out an audible exhale, or imagining an audible exhale in your mind's eye. Taking another deep breath, inhaling slowly, pulling everything up from your body that remains stagnant, and again taking a long, deep exhale, clearing the way, pushing the fire up and out. Repeating this breath a few more times, building power and courage and confidence, becoming more sure of your fire with every breath. Maybe there is a sound that wishes to escape or present itself to you as you move this fire up and out. It may be a grunt or a growl or a roar. Allowing this fire to course through your body to make way for action, justice, and freedom, both internally and externally, for yourself, for those you come in contact with, and most especially for those made most marginalized. Whenever you feel like you need that fire or that grief to be moved, take a deep, long breath into the belly. Now allowing your breath to return to its normal cadence, using your inhale to bring you back into the present moment, slowly re-emerging into the present, into your space. When you are ready, slowly opening your eyes if they were closed or lowered, focusing on one thing in your space to ground you in the here and now. Giving thanks to the ever-present inner fire and the energy it contains to transmute grief into action, into movement, to combat injustice, creating more space for ease both internally and externally. taking a moment to bow in deep honor of the South Asian ancestors who created and cultivated the practice of meditation so that we can partake in it together today. And I thank you for trusting me in this practice. Bowing in deep gratitude for joining me. Ashe.